Hello everyone, welcome. Help me grow my channel by subscribing. Tell me which place are you talking about. And now let's get started. My name is Brian Mitchell, and what I'm about to share with you arrived in my inbox 3 days ago. As someone who spent 15 years investigating cybercrime for various news outlets, I've seen my share of digital deception. But this one's different. I've chosen to call the sender Rebecca Hayes, though that's not her real name. Her story needs to be told, but her identity must be protected. The email began with words that would haunt me. I thought I was just looking for love, but I found something much darker simmering beneath the surface. Rebecca's tale started in her restaurant, Harvest and Hearth, a farm-to-table establishment that had become Seattle's rising star in sustainable dining. After her divorce, Rebecca's friends convinced her to try Happn, saying it might help her meet someone who shared her passion for food. The app's premise of connecting with people you cross paths with seemed perfect for someone whose life revolved around her restaurant and local farmers markets. The first match that caught her attention was Alexander. Tall, sophisticated, with a profile that spoke of a deep appreciation for artisanal cooking and sustainable farming. His photos showed him at various food festivals and farmers markets she frequently visited. He claimed to be a food critic for an up-and-coming digital magazine. Their first conversation flowed naturally, centered around their shared love for local ingredients and innovative cooking techniques. When he mentioned having dined at her restaurant the previous week, she was flattered, but not surprised. Harvest and Hearth had been getting considerable attention lately. What did surprise her was his detailed knowledge of her seasonal menu changes, and his specific compliments about dishes that hadn't yet been officially announced. At the time, she attributed it to industry gossip. The coincidences began to pile up like dirty dishes during a dinner rush. Alexander seemed to appear at every farmer's market she visited, always just happening to be there at the same time. He'd engage her in conversations about specific ingredients she was sourcing, asking detailed questions about her suppliers. Her restaurant began receiving reservations under different names, but she'd always spot Alexander at one of the tables, sometimes alone, sometimes with different companions. He'd order new dishes the day they were added to the menu, often before they were publicly announced. Strange reviews started appearing online, not negative ones, but reviews that mentioned dishes she was still developing, techniques she'd only discussed with her kitchen staff. They were posted under different names, but the writing style was consistently familiar. One evening, she noticed someone following her delivery truck from the farmer's market. When she checked the security cameras later, she saw a familiar figure, walking through the back alley where her suppliers made their deliveries, taking photos of the crates and invoices. Her sous chef mentioned that a food critic had been asking very specific questions about their fermentation processes and aging techniques, proprietary methods Rebecca had developed herself. The critic's description matched Alexander perfectly. Rebecca's suspicions reached a boiling point when she received a promotional email from a new restaurant opening across town. The menu featured dishes that were eerily similar to her upcoming seasonal offerings, dishes she hadn't yet unveiled. She began documenting everything. Photographs of Alexander at the markets, screenshots of his seemingly prescient reviews, security footage of him lingering near her delivery entrance. The pattern that emerged was methodical and calculated. A background check revealed that Alexander's food critic credentials were as fake as a microwave gourmet meal. The digital magazine he claimed to work for was a sophisticated front, created just months before they matched on Happn. Working with her friend in IT security, Rebecca discovered that her restaurant's computer system had been compromised. Someone had been accessing her recipe database, cost sheets, and supplier contracts. The intrusion was sophisticated, but they traced it back to several IP addresses, one of which matched the location where Alexander often sat in her restaurant. More disturbing was the discovery that similar infiltrations had occurred at other successful farm-to-table restaurants in Portland and Vancouver. Each case followed the same pattern: a charming food critic, coincidental meetings, and eventual theft of proprietary recipes and supplier information. What they uncovered wasn't just corporate espionage. It was a systematic operation targeting successful sustainable restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. The truth made Rebecca's blood run cold. Alexander was really David Chen, a former executive chef who'd been quietly building a restaurant empire through theft and deception. His method was always the same: identify successful independent restaurants, infiltrate their operations, steal their recipes and supplier networks, then open competing establishments that would ultimately drive them out of business. The dating app was his perfect cover. It allowed him to explain away his presence at markets and restaurants, while also giving him intimate access to his targets. He specifically chose apps like Happn that emphasized physical proximity, making his constant appearances seem less suspicious. Rebecca discovered that David had already opened 6 restaurants in different cities, each one built on stolen concepts and recipes. He targeted chefs who, like her, were passionate about sustainable local cuisine, knowing their unique recipes, and supplier relationships were their most valuable assets. Her friend in IT helped her access David's cloud storage, where they found folders meticulously organized by restaurant name. Each contained thousands of photos, dishes, plating techniques, supplier invoices, even copies of handwritten recipe notes stolen from chefs' offices. What made it worse was the realization that he wasn't working alone. The different companions she'd seen dining with him were part of his team: photographers, hackers, and business analysts who helped him perfect his technique of restaurant replication. The operation went beyond simple recipe theft. They found evidence of supplier sabotage, where David's team would approach key suppliers with better offers, slowly cutting off the original restaurants from their essential ingredients. Rebecca decided to turn the tables. Using her newfound knowledge of his operation, she began feeding false information through channels she knew were compromised. She created fictional recipes with subtle flaws that only an experienced chef would recognize after attempting them. She worked with other affected restaurant owners to set up a sting operation. They planted stories about a secret pop-up dinner featuring their most successful dishes, knowing David couldn't resist the opportunity to steal an entire menu at once. The trap was elaborate but perfectly baited. They created a fake supplier network, complete with convincing documentation and a temporary warehouse space. Everything was monitored and recorded, creating an irrefutable trail of evidence. When David arrived at the warehouse with his team, expecting to meet with supposed suppliers, they instead found themselves confronted with police and FBI agents specializing in corporate espionage. The evidence was overwhelming: stolen recipes, fraudulent documents, and detailed plans for future restaurant theft. The investigation revealed a network that stretched beyond restaurants. David had been selling stolen recipes and supplier information to restaurant groups across the country. His operation had compromised dozens of independent restaurants, many of which had been forced to close. The most disturbing discovery was his detailed playbook, a manual for infiltrating and replicating successful restaurants, complete with psychological profiles of targeted chefs and strategies for exploiting their vulnerabilities through dating apps. As I conclude Rebecca's story, the implications leave a bitter taste. What she uncovered wasn't just about stolen recipes or corporate espionage. It was about the vulnerability of passion and creativity in the digital age. David Chen was sentenced to federal prison for fraud and corporate espionage. His restaurant empire, built on stolen dreams, is being dismantled. The proceeds will go to compensating the chefs and restaurant owners he victimized. Rebecca's case has sparked a movement in the restaurant industry. Chefs are implementing better security measures, and there's pending legislation to provide better protection for culinary intellectual property. But the real change is in awareness. The understanding that in our connected world, passion can be a vulnerability that predators exploit. Her restaurant, Harvest and Hearth, continues to thrive. She's transformed her experience into a mission, working with other chefs to protect their creative property. As she wrote in her final email to me, "In the kitchen, we learn that the best recipes require balance, not just of flavors, but of trust and caution." The dating apps on her phone are gone now. She tells me she prefers to meet people the old-fashioned way, across a table, sharing real food and authentic stories. But her security cameras remain, and her recipes are now stored in a system that would make the CIA proud. Perhaps most importantly, Rebecca's story reminds us that in this age of digital connection, the most dangerous predators aren't always seeking traditional prey. Sometimes they're hunting for something more abstract: our passions, our creativity, and the unique ingredients that make us who we are. My name is Brian Mitchell. 2 weeks ago, I received an email that made me question everything about modern dating and social connection. The sender asked to remain anonymous, so I'll refer to her as Grace Miller. Her story needs to be shared, because it could happen to any of us, especially those who work when the rest of the world sleeps. Night shifts at Boston General were always unsettling, but Grace had grown accustomed to the rhythm of emergency medicine after dark. The quiet moments between emergencies, the sound of monitors beeping, and the fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal had become her normal over the past year. She hadn't planned on downloading Happn. It was her colleague Sarah who convinced her, saying that working nights shouldn't mean giving up on dating. The app seemed perfect for someone with her schedule, It matched you with people you crossed paths with, and in a hospital as large as Boston General, there were plenty of other night shift workers. The first few matches were predictable: paramedics, security guards, and other nurses. Then she matched with Dr. Thomas Reed. His profile was exactly what you'd expect from a doctor: professional headshot, photos from medical conferences, and a few casual shots that showed he had a life outside the hospital. His bio mentioned being new to the night shift in the ER. Their first conversation flowed naturally, discussing the unique challenges of working while others slept. He seemed to understand her world perfectly, even joking about the strange things that only happen in emergency rooms at 3 a.m. When he mentioned having seen her during handover, she wasn't surprised. New doctors often rotated through different departments. The first sign that something was wrong came during a particularly quiet night shift. Grace was doing her rounds when she noticed someone watching her from the end of a dimly lit corridor. When she turned to look again, they were gone. She convinced herself it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. The nighttime incidents began to multiply. Grace would find charts pulled for patients she was about to check on, as if someone knew her round schedule. Coffee would appear at the nurse's station, her specific order from the 24-hour cafe across the street, but she hadn't ordered it. Thomas seemed to know exactly when to message her, always during her breaks or quiet moments. He'd reference things about her routine that she hadn't shared: her preference for the stairwell over the elevator, which vending machine she thought had the best snacks, even which parking spot she usually took. One night, she found a patient's file open on the computer at her station, a case she'd handled the previous week that she hadn't discussed with anyone. When she checked the access logs, they showed no unauthorized entries. But there was something else. Similar files of her past patients had been accessed from different terminals throughout the hospital. The security cameras in the parking garage caught her attention one morning after her shift. As she reviewed the footage for an unrelated incident, she noticed the same figure appearing in the background of several recordings, always just far, enough away to be unidentifiable but clearly following her path to her car. During her breaks, Grace began to investigate Dr. Thomas Reed more thoroughly. His hospital ID checked out, but something felt off. No one in the ER seemed to know him personally, despite him supposedly working night shifts. The medical conferences in his photos were real, but when she looked closer at the badges visible in the pictures, the dates didn't match his story. It was Sarah who first voiced what Grace had been trying to ignore. "Have you noticed how Thomas seems to know things about patients before they're entered into the system?" she asked during their coffee break. That simple question led them down a disturbing path of investigation. Working with hospital IT, they discovered that someone had been accessing the hospital's scheduling system using stolen credentials. The access points were scattered throughout the hospital, but followed a pattern. They aligned perfectly with Grace's rotation through different departments. The photos from Thomas's profile yielded another shock. When Sarah's friend in IT ran them through a professional image analysis tool, they found subtle signs of manipulation. The medical conference badges had been digitally altered, and his face had been carefully photoshopped into legitimate hospital staff photos. Grace began documenting everything: screenshots of their conversations, security footage timestamps, and records of unauthorized system access. The pattern that emerged was methodical and calculating. Whoever was behind the Thomas Reed profile had been studying her routine long before they matched on Happn. More disturbing was what they found when they dug deeper into hospital records. 3 other nurses who worked night shifts had filed reports about strange incidents: missing personal items, unexplained access to their patient records, and feelings of being watched. All 3 had transferred to different hospitals within the past year. The final piece clicked when Grace received a friend's suggestion on social media: Thomas Reed's supposedly private account. The photos there showed a completely different person, but in the background of one image, she spotted something chilling: her own apartment building, photographed from across the street. Working with hospital security and local police, Grace learned that Thomas had likely been gathering information about night shift workers for months. His method was sophisticated, using stolen hospital credentials to track potential targets through their electronic footprints. The investigation revealed that the hospital's security system had been compromised in subtle ways. Camera feeds had been looped during certain times, keycard access logs had been altered, and someone had installed small cameras in less monitored areas of the hospital, particularly near the staff locker rooms. Grace's apartment building's security footage revealed something even more disturbing. Someone had been gaining access to the building during her shifts, using a maintenance keycard that had been reported missing months ago. The cameras caught glimpses of them in the hallway near her apartment, always when she was at work. The police set up surveillance, both at the hospital and Grace's apartment. They discovered sophisticated listening devices in both locations. Whoever Thomas was, he had been able to hear her conversations, know her movements, and track her daily patterns in intimate detail. What they found in Grace's apartment made her blood run cold. Hidden cameras had been installed in air vents, smoke detectors, and even her bathroom mirror. The feed from these cameras was being transmitted to an unknown location, and forensic analysis showed they had been active for weeks. The most chilling discovery came from her laptop. Someone had installed software that gave them complete access to her computer. Emails, photos, private messages, and even her webcam. They had been watching her both at work and at home, building a complete profile of her life. The police set up a trap, using Grace's routine as bait. They knew the stalker would be watching, so they maintained her normal patterns while setting up surveillance of their own. The hospital security team was briefed, and unmarked officers were stationed throughout her usual routes. During one night shift, Grace noticed a maintenance worker she'd never seen before, working in a restricted area. When she called security to check, they confirmed no maintenance was scheduled. The worker disappeared before security arrived, but not before the cameras caught a clear image of his face. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A new nurse recognized the maintenance worker's photo. He had stalked her at her previous hospital in Philadelphia. She had transferred to Boston to escape him, never filing a formal report out of fear. Her information provided the stalker's real identity. He was Martin Walsh, a former hospital IT administrator who had been fired for inappropriately accessing patient records. He had worked at hospitals across the Northeast, always focusing on staff who worked night shifts. His technical expertise had allowed him to create elaborate false identities and manipulate hospital security systems. The police raid on Walsh's apartment revealed the full scope of his operation. Multiple monitors displayed live feeds from cameras in several hospitals and apartments. Files contained detailed information about dozens of healthcare workers who worked night shifts. Their routines, relationships, and personal habits all meticulously documented. The most disturbing find was a room dedicated to Grace. Photos covered the walls, surveillance shots spanning months before they matched on Happn. Her entire life had been mapped out, from her daily coffee order to the books on her nightstand. Walsh had been building a complete picture of her life, learning every detail before making contact. As I write this, Martin Walsh is awaiting trial on multiple charges of stalking, cyberstalking, and illegal surveillance. The investigation has expanded to include hospitals in 5 states, with more victims coming forward each week. The night shift, it seems, had provided perfect cover for his obsessive surveillance. Grace has transferred to day shifts and moved to a new apartment. The experience has changed how she views the world, especially the quiet, empty spaces of night. She's working with hospital administration to implement better security protocols for night shift workers, knowing they're particularly vulnerable. The dating apps are gone from her phone now. As she wrote in her final email to me, the scariest part wasn't the technology he used. It was how he used legitimate systems, turned our normal routines against us. He didn't need to break in, he just needed to be patient and watch. The night shift already makes you feel isolated from the normal world. He knew how to use that isolation. Hospital IT systems across the country are being audited, looking for similar security breaches. Grace's case has sparked a national conversation about protecting healthcare workers, especially those who work when most of the world sleeps. New protocols are being developed, but the underlying vulnerability remains. What haunts Grace most isn't the surveillance or the stalking. It's the realization that her normal routine, the quiet patterns of her night shift life, had made her a perfect target. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who learn to hide within the systems we trust. The night shift at Boston General continues, but things have changed. Security cameras are checked more frequently, ID badges are scrutinized more carefully, and workers are more aware of their surroundings. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when the fluorescent lights cast long shadows in empty corridors, the night shift staff can't help but wonder, who else might be watching from the darkness? My name is Brian Mitchell. This morning, I received an email that exposes the dark side of modern dating apps. The sender asked to remain anonymous, so I'll refer to her as Jenny Carter. This story needs to be shared because it could happen to anyone looking for connection in our digital age. Seattle's rainy season was in full swing when Jenny started using Happn. Working double shifts at the downtown diner wasn't exactly helping her social life, and the app seemed perfect. It matched you with people you crossed paths with in real life. At least she wouldn't be meeting complete strangers, or so she thought. Mark's profile looked normal enough. 31, software engineer, photos of him hiking and at local breweries. His bio was clever without trying too hard, and he had linked his Instagram account, which showed years of posts. When they matched, his first message mentioned seeing her at her diner, complimenting the way she handled a difficult customer. Their first conversations were casual, discussing favorite spots in the city. He seemed to know all the places she frequented, her coffee shop, the park where she jogged, even her favorite bookstore. At the time, it just felt like they had similar tastes. Seattle wasn't that big, after all. The first red flag appeared when he mentioned seeing her at the grocery store the previous night. She hadn't been to the store. She'd been homesick. When she pointed this out, he quickly backtracked, saying he must have confused her with someone else. The excuse seemed reasonable, but something felt off. That weekend, she started noticing a gray Honda Civic frequently parked near her diner. Different spots each time, but always within view of the entrance. She'd seen enough crime shows to know she was probably being paranoid, but she took a photo of the license plate just in case. The coincidental meetings began to multiply. Mark would show up at her coffee shop right after her shift, claiming he was in the neighborhood. He appeared at her gym during her usual workout time, saying he'd just switched locations. Even her quiet Sunday morning grocery runs seemed to result in chance encounters. His knowledge of her life became increasingly detailed. He asked about her sister's wedding preparations, something she'd only discussed with co-workers inside the diner. He mentioned her recent doctor's appointment, wondering if she was feeling better. She hadn't told him about either. Jenny began paying more attention to her surroundings. The gray Civic appeared everywhere, near her apartment, at the mall, outside her friend's house. When she mentioned feeling watched to her roommate, Sarah suggested documenting everything. That's when the pattern became clear. Looking through her photos, she realized the same car had been in the background for weeks. More disturbing were the unexpected details: shopping bags from stores she'd visited, coffee cups from her regular cafe, even a glimpse of her gym bag. Someone had been studying her routine. Her phone started acting strangely. Apps would open by themselves, the camera light would flash randomly, and her battery drained faster than usual. When she mentioned this to Mark, he offered to take a look at it, saying he knew a lot about phones. She declined. That night, she received a text from an unknown number. "Blue looks good on you." She was wearing a new blue sweater she'd bought that day, alone, in a mall across town. Jenny tried to distance herself from Mark gradually. She made excuses about being busy, took different routes to work, and varied her schedule. That's when the gifts started appearing. Left at her car, at her table in the coffee shop, even at her apartment door. None included cards, but they were all things she'd mentioned liking in passing. The messages became more frequent and unsettling. He commented on conversations she'd had in private, described what she'd eaten for lunch, even knew when she'd called her mom. When she didn't respond, he sent screenshots of her location from various dating apps she'd deleted weeks ago. Sarah convinced Jenny to check their apartment for hidden cameras. They found 3, one facing their parking spot, another with a view of their front door, and most disturbingly, one hidden in their hallway smoke detector. The police said they were high-end models, not something an amateur would use. The building's security footage revealed more. The same figure appeared repeatedly in the backgrounds, wearing different clothes, but with the same build and movement patterns. He'd been watching her for weeks before they even matched on Happn. When Jenny tried blocking Mark's number, messages came from new ones. Each text revealed more intimate knowledge of her life, her childhood hometown, her father's heart condition, even the name of her first pet. Information that wasn't on any social media. Local police finally took her seriously when she showed them the pattern. Dozens of photos of the same car, screenshots of impossible messages, and security footage of someone systematically documenting her every move. The investigation revealed that Mark wasn't just some over-eager admirer. His real name was Peter Daly, and Jenny wasn't his first victim. 3 other women in Seattle had filed similar complaints, all involving matches from dating apps, all describing the same pattern of escalating surveillance. Peter hadn't just been following Jenny online. He'd created an elaborate network of fake profiles across multiple platforms, all designed to track different aspects of her life. Each profile collected different pieces of information, building a complete picture of her daily routines. The tech company where he claimed to work had never heard of him. Instead, he worked freelance IT jobs, using his skills to hack phones, install spyware, and manipulate social media data. The police found a laptop in his car containing detailed files on Jenny and several other women. Inside his apartment, they discovered what the detective called a command center, multiple monitors showing security camera feeds, GPS tracking, data, and social media activity of various women. Maps on the walls marked daily routines with military precision. One wall was dedicated entirely to Jenny. Photos, schedules, notes about her habits and relationships. Most disturbing were the keys, copies of building access cards, car keys, even a set that matched Jenny's apartment. He had been inside her, home multiple times while she was at work, learning her life from the inside out. The cameras in her apartment had been active for over a month. The evidence showed he had been stalking Jenny for weeks before creating his dating profile, using the app as a way to normalize his presence in her life. Every coincidental meeting had been carefully orchestrated, every shared interest researched and manufactured. The police set up a sting operation, using Jenny's routine as bait. They knew Peter was watching, so they maintained her normal patterns, while installing their own surveillance. It had to look natural. Any obvious police presence would send him into hiding. The break came during one of Jenny's closing shifts at the diner. Peter had started getting bolder, frustrated by her attempts to avoid him. When she left work that night, he finally approached her directly, acting as if they were old friends who kept missing each other. The police moved in, but Peter had planned for this too. He ran through a series of pre-planned escape routes, using his knowledge of the area's security camera blind spots. It was clear he had studied police response patterns just as thoroughly as he had studied Jenny. The chase led them through back alleys and service corridors of downtown Seattle, places Peter had clearly scouted in advance. He had stashed different clothes, phones, and even fake IDs at various points throughout the city. This wasn't just stalking. It was a military-grade operation. They finally cornered him in a parking garage, but not before he managed to send one last message to Jenny. "You'll never really be free. I know everything about you." The threat was clear. Even in custody, he had gathered enough information to haunt her indefinitely. The search of his car revealed the full scope of his preparations. Multiple phones, laptops, and tablets were found, each dedicated to tracking different aspects of Jenny's life. He had backup plans for his backup plans, all meticulously documented and ready to execute. Jenny's story isn't over. It never really will be. Peter is in custody, but the information he gathered can't be uncollected. She's moved apartments, changed her routines, and deleted her social media accounts. But the feeling of being watched lingers. Every unknown car, every stranger with a phone, now carries the weight of potential threat. The investigation revealed more victims across multiple states. Peter had refined his technique over years, using dating apps as his primary hunting ground. He specifically chose apps like Happn that emphasized physical proximity, using their features to justify his constant presence in his victims' lives. The police found detailed guides on his computers, instructions for compromising phones, hacking home Wi-Fi networks, and manipulating dating app algorithms. He had turned modern connectivity into a weapon, using our digital footprints to stalk more effectively than any traditional predator. Jenny works different shifts now, varies her routes constantly, and pays for everything in cash. Her new apartment has no smart devices, no Wi-Fi, nothing that could be used to track her. As she wrote in her final email to me, "The scariest part isn't what he did. It's knowing that anyone could do it. Our whole lives are online, and we never realize how vulnerable that makes us until it's too late." The dating apps are gone from her phone, replaced by a new awareness of how easily our digital lives can be turned against us. She's working with advocacy groups now, helping other women recognize the signs she missed. But she knows there are more Peters out there, studying profiles, analyzing patterns, waiting for their next match. In the end, what makes Jenny's story so terrifying isn't the technology Peter used or the information he gathered. It's how easily he turned normal modern dating behaviors into tools for predation. Every like, every check-in, every casual post becomes a potential vulnerability when viewed through the lens of someone determined to know everything about you. My name is Brian Mitchell. Last week, I received an email that I feel compelled to share. The sender requested anonymity, so I'll refer to her as Rachel Turner. Her story serves as a warning about how easily our daily routines can be turned against us, especially in this age of hyperconnectivity. The coffee shop where Rachel worked wasn't particularly special, just another independent cafe in downtown Chicago. Like most baristas, she had her share of regular customers, remembered their usual orders, and maintained the polite professionalism that the job required. The morning rush was always busy, faces blending together in a caffeine-fueled blur. That's why Michael stood out. He always came in at 9:15 a.m. just after the rush, ordering a simple Americano. He was well-dressed, polite, and tipped well. Nothing about him raised any red flags. He was just another businessman who appreciated good coffee. When they matched, on Happn, it seemed like a pleasant coincidence. Their initial chat was normal enough. They discussed coffee, of course, Chicago winters, and their favorite spots in the city. He mentioned having seen her a few times at the cafe before downloading the app, and she remembered him as one of her regulars. It felt nice to put a name to a familiar face. Michael's visits to the cafe became more frequent. Instead of just his morning Americano, he started coming in during her afternoon shifts too. He'd sit at the corner table, laptop open, occasionally glancing up to smile at her. At first, it seemed flattering, maybe even a bit romantic. The first hint that something was off came when he mentioned seeing her at the grocery store the previous evening. "That green sweater looked nice on you," he said casually. Rachel hadn't remembered seeing him there, but big grocery stores were always crowded. Still, something about the way he said it made her uneasy. The coincidental meetings started multiplying. He'd be at her yoga studio, claiming he'd just started taking classes. She'd spot him at her favorite bookstore, always just browsing. Even her short walk home would sometimes include a surprise run-in with Michael, who'd say he was just heading to a meeting. During their Happn chats, he began referencing things she hadn't told him: her sister's name, where she went to college, details about her childhood in Milwaukee. When she asked how he knew these things, he'd say she must have mentioned them during one of their cafe conversations. She knew she hadn't. Rachel started noticing small changes in her routine. Her usual parking spot would be taken, forcing her to park in a different area. The route she took to work would have unexpected construction, making her take detours. Each change seemed to result in another accidental meeting with Michael. Her coworkers noticed changes too. Deliveries would arrive at odd times when she was working alone. Phone calls would come in asking for her schedule. Someone kept ordering deliveries to her apartment, though she never ordered food to her home. Each incident seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. The final straw came when she received a message from him commenting on the new curtains in her bedroom. "They let in too much light, don't they?" he wrote. "You've been having trouble sleeping." Rachel felt her blood run cold. She had only put those curtains up the day before, and her bedroom was on the 3rd floor. Rachel began documenting everything. She kept a log of Michael's visits to the cafe, the coincidental meetings, and every message they exchanged. She took screenshots of their Happn conversations and saved security footage from the cafe. The pattern that emerged was methodical and frightening. Working with her best friend, a computer science student, they discovered that Michael's Happn profile had been created just days before their first match. His other social media profiles were sparse and recent. The company he claimed to work for had no record of him. Everything about his online presence felt carefully crafted. The cafe's security cameras revealed more. On days when Rachel worked alone, Michael would arrive early, before opening, and linger around the back entrance. He'd follow her at a distance when she took out the trash or received deliveries. Sometimes he'd stay parked outside long after closing. Looking deeper, they found he had created multiple dating app profiles using different names but similar photos. Each profile was designed to match with different aspects of Rachel's interests and routine. He had been trying to match with her on several apps, increasing the chances of a connection. They discovered he'd been using the app's location feature to track her movements. By creating multiple profiles and studying the crossed paths feature, he could piece together her daily routine. The app had essentially become a surveillance tool. Rachel's friend also found something disturbing when analyzing Michael's photos. They were all taken within a few blocks of places Rachel frequented. He had been mapping her routine long before. They matched on Happn, using the photos to create a profile she'd find appealing. Things got worse after Rachel stopped responding to Michael's messages. Notes started appearing. On her car, in her mailbox, slipped under her apartment door. They were always innocent sounding, but carried an underlying threat. "Missing your smile at the cafe? Hope you're sleeping better. That yellow dress today looked nice." The cafe's security system started having problems. Cameras would go offline at specific times. The back door's keypad would register multiple failed entry attempts late at night. Delivery schedules were mysteriously changed, always when Rachel was working alone. Her social media accounts began receiving friend requests from strangers who seemed to know details about her life. Her email was flooded with notifications from dating sites she'd never signed up for. Someone had been using her photos and personal information to create fake profiles. Rachel's co-workers began receiving messages too. friend requests from Michael's, various profiles, LinkedIn connections from his supposed colleagues, even job offers from his fictional company. It was as if he was trying to infiltrate every aspect of her life through her social circle. The police were limited in what they could do. Michael had been careful. Nothing he did was explicitly threatening, and he maintained plausible deniability for each incident. They suggested she document everything and consider a restraining order, but warned that building a case would take time. One morning, Rachel arrived at work to find her entire schedule for the week posted on the cafe's social media page. A mistake by a new employee who claimed they'd received the request from her personal email. The email address used was a convincing fake, nearly identical to her real one. The turning point came when Rachel's sister visited from Milwaukee. Within hours of her arrival, she started receiving messages from Michael on her own social media accounts. He knew details about their childhood, information that could only have come from extensive research or long-term surveillance. Rachel's sister recognized his face. He had been in Milwaukee the previous month, asking questions about Rachel at her old workplace. He'd posed as a high school friend doing research for a reunion. The employees there had innocently shared stories and photos, not realizing his true intentions. Working with police, they discovered Michael had rented an apartment in Rachel's building under a false name. The unit had a direct view of her windows. Inside, they found detailed notes about her schedule, photos taken with a long-range lens, and recordings of her phone conversations captured through a sophisticated listening device. The evidence was damning. Multiple fake IDs, credit cards in different names, and detailed files on not just Rachel, but several other women in Chicago and Milwaukee. He had been practicing, refining his technique, learning from each attempt how to better infiltrate someone's life. The investigation revealed his real identity, James Peterson, a former IT security consultant with a history of stalking complaints in 3 states. He had used his technical knowledge to create an elaborate system of surveillance and manipulation, with dating apps serving as his primary tool for selecting and researching targets. His computer contained manuals he'd written about using dating apps to track potential victims. He had detailed guides about exploiting app features, creating convincing false identities, and using location data to map people's routines. The level of preparation was staggering. James Peterson was arrested and charged with stalking, cyberstalking, and illegal surveillance. The investigation expanded as more victims were identified through his files. Each case followed the same pattern: dating app connections leading to escalating surveillance and psychological manipulation. Rachel moved to a new apartment and changed jobs. The experience left her hyper-aware of how much information we unknowingly share through our daily routines. She works now with advocacy groups, helping other stalking victims and pushing for stronger privacy protections in dating apps. The dating apps are gone from her phone. As she wrote in her final email to me, the scariest part wasn't the technology he used. It was how normal everything seemed at first. He didn't have to hack into my life. I had already made it public. Every check-in, every tagged location, every shared photo became a piece of a map he used to hunt me. The cafe installed new security systems, and dating apps updated their policies regarding location tracking and profile verification. But the underlying vulnerability remains. Our connected world makes it easier than ever for predators to gather intelligence and create opportunities for chance encounters. What haunts Rachel most isn't the surveillance or the stalking. It's how easily it could happen to anyone. Her routine wasn't particularly unique. Her social media presence wasn't excessive, and her use of dating apps wasn't careless. She was simply living a normal life in a world where normal has become increasingly dangerous. The coffee shop downtown still serves its morning rush, but something has changed. The baristas are more cautious with regulars, more aware of patterns, more protective of their personal information. And somewhere in Chicago, another casual coffee shop conversation is beginning, leaving everyone to wonder, is this just friendly chat, or is it the start of something much darker? My name is Brian Mitchell. Yesterday, I received an email that shook me to my core. The sender, whom I'll call Amy Parker, shared a story that exposes the dark intersection of ride-sharing and dating apps. Her experience reveals how predators can exploit the very technology designed to keep us safe. Night shifts were Amy's preference: better tips, less traffic, and higher surge pricing. As a rideshare driver in Boston, she'd learned to trust her instincts and maintain clear boundaries with passengers. After 2 years on the job, she had a perfect rating and enough regular clients to feel relatively secure in her work. The first time she picked up Nathan, it seemed like any other ride. Well-dressed, polite, He was heading home from a late meeting downtown. He sat in the back, respected her space, and maintained appropriate conversation. When they matched on Happn the next day, it felt like an interesting coincidence. Their initial chat was casual, comparing notes about favorite late-night spots in Boston, laughing about the peculiarities of night shift work. He mentioned being new to the city, working in finance, often needing rides home from late meetings. Nothing seemed out of place. Over the next week, Nathan's ride requests became regular. Always late at night, always through the official rideshare app. He was a good tipper and never made her uncomfortable. When he suggested getting coffee sometime, it seemed harmless enough. After all, she'd had plenty of time to observe his behavior. However, the first red flag appeared when he started mentioning other rides she'd given, ones where he wasn't the passenger. "That must have been a rough fare last night," he said one evening. "That drunk guy seemed really aggressive." Amy couldn't remember telling him about that incident. The coincidences began piling up. Nathan would request rides from locations along her usual route, even though he claimed his office was downtown. She'd spot him on the street when dropping off other passengers. Sometimes she'd see his car following at a distance. He'd wave and claim he was just heading the same way. Her rideshare app started acting strangely. Requests would come in, then cancel immediately. GPS routes would glitch, redirecting her to isolated areas. When she checked her trip history, she found rides she didn't remember accepting, all canceled at the last minute. Other drivers in her area reported similar experiences: mysterious cancellations, GPS malfunctions, and a well-dressed passenger who always seemed to know details about their previous rides. When Amy started comparing notes with them, a pattern emerged. All the affected drivers were women who worked night shifts. Through the rideshare drivers' private Facebook group, Amy discovered that Nathan had matched with several other female drivers on various dating apps. Each time, he used the same approach, becoming a regular passenger first, then engineering a chance match on dating apps. The most disturbing revelation came when she reviewed her dashcam footage. In recordings from rides where Nathan wasn't a passenger, she caught glimpses of his car in her rearview mirror. He had been following her for weeks, learning her patterns, studying her interactions with other passengers. Amy began documenting everything. She installed additional cameras in her car, kept detailed logs of her rides, and saved all communications through both the rideshare and dating apps. Her friend in IT helped her analyze the data, revealing a disturbing pattern of digital stalking. They discovered that Nathan had somehow gained access to the rideshare platform's driver's side. He could see her location in real time, monitor her acceptance rates, and even access limited parts of her profile information. The level of technical sophistication suggested this wasn't his first time. Working with other drivers, they pieced together Nathan's methodology. He targeted female drivers who worked consistent night shifts, used dating apps, and drove predictable routes. He would study their patterns for weeks before making contact, using the rideshare app to gather intelligence. The rideshare company's investigation revealed multiple driver accounts had been compromised. Someone had been using a sophisticated program to track specific drivers, accessing their location data and ride histories. The breach had gone unnoticed because it mimicked normal system operations. Amy's IT friend found something even more disturbing. Nathan had created a network of fake passenger accounts, all used to book and cancel rides strategically. These accounts helped him manipulate drivers' routes, forcing them into specific areas where he could accidentally encounter them. By cross-referencing ride data with dating app matches, they uncovered at least 12 other drivers who had been targeted using the same method. Each case followed an identical pattern: technical intrusion followed by calculated coincidental meetings. Things took a darker turn when Amy stopped accepting Nathan's ride requests. Her car's tires were slashed one night while she was parked at a rest stop. The police found sophisticated tracking devices planted under her vehicle. Her home security system reported multiple breach attempts. Other drivers who had rejected Nathan began reporting similar incidents. Their cars were vandalized, their personal information was leaked online, and their families received threatening messages. The pattern of escalation was identical in each case: property damage followed by increasing personal threats. The police investigation revealed Nathan's true identity: Eric Morrison, a former rideshare company software engineer who had been fired for inappropriate access to user data. He had continued to exploit his knowledge of the system's vulnerabilities, targeting drivers in multiple cities. His technical expertise had allowed him to create a sophisticated surveillance network. By combining rideshare data with dating app locations, he could track drivers' movements both on and off duty. He had essentially turned the app's safety features into weapons against the drivers. The investigation uncovered a hidden server containing detailed files on dozens of female drivers across the country. Each file included photos, route maps, personal information, and disturbingly detailed notes about daily routines, regular passengers, and potential vulnerabilities. Most chilling were the pre-written scripts found on his computer. Carefully crafted conversations designed to seem natural while extracting specific information. He had created decision trees for hundreds of possible interactions, each designed to manipulate drivers into revealing more about their lives. The breakthrough came when Amy agreed to help set up a sting operation. Working with police, she maintained her usual route while a surveillance team monitored Nathan's activities. They needed to catch him in the act of stalking and system manipulation. The operation revealed the full scope of his activities. Nathan had set up a mobile command center in his car, equipped with technology to intercept communications and track multiple vehicles simultaneously. He had been running a sophisticated stalking operation under the guise of being a regular passenger. During the sting, they discovered he had recruited others, teaching them his methods in exchange for access to their technical skills. What had started as one predator's operation had evolved into a network of stalkers, all using rideshare and dating apps to target vulnerable drivers. The police raid on his apartment uncovered the command center where he monitored his targets. Multiple screens displayed live GPS tracking of various drivers, their dating app activities, and personal information. He had created detailed profiles of potential victims, ranking them by vulnerability. The evidence was overwhelming. Thousands of hours of surveillance footage, compromised driver accounts, and detailed plans for future targets. The level of premeditation and technical sophistication demonstrated this was far more than simple stalking. It was a systematic operation to exploit and terrorize women working alone at night. The most disturbing discovery was his long-term plan. He had been gathering information to create a network of compromised rideshare accounts, planning to use them for more sinister purposes. The stalking was just the first phase of a larger criminal enterprise. As I conclude this account, Eric Morrison awaits trial on multiple federal charges. The investigation has expanded to include similar cases in other cities, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior targeting female rideshare drivers across the country. The rideshare industry has been forced to confront its vulnerabilities. New security protocols are being implemented, driver privacy is being enhanced, and the relationship between transportation and dating apps is being reevaluated. But the fundamental risks of working alone at night remain. Amy still drives, but everything has changed. Her car is now equipped with multiple cameras and a panic button. She shares her location with a safety network of other drivers, and they monitor each other's routes. The dating apps are gone from her phone, replaced by a heightened awareness of digital vulnerability. The community of night shift drivers has transformed. They've created their own security networks, sharing information about suspicious passengers and maintaining contact throughout their shifts. What began as a solitary job has become a tight-knit community of mutual protection. As Amy wrote in her final email to me, the scariest part wasn't the technology he used, or even the stalking itself. It was realizing that the tools we rely on, for safety, GPS tracking, rating systems, driver verification, could so easily be turned against us. Every safety feature became a weapon in the right hands. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this story is its simplicity. How easily someone with technical knowledge could transform everyday apps into tools of terror. In our connected world, the line between convenience and vulnerability is razor thin, and the people we trust to get us home safely might be the ones who need protection the most. My name is Brian Mitchell. 3 days ago, I received an email that made me question the safety of places we consider secure. The sender, whom I'll call Kate Morrison, shared a story that reveals how predators can turn our healthy routines into opportunities for stalking. Peak Fitness was Portland's fastest-growing gym chain, with 24 locations across the city. For Kate, working as a personal trainer meant splitting her time between different branches, helping clients reach their fitness goals. The flexible schedule and variety of locations kept the job interesting. When Ryan first signed up for personal training sessions, he seemed like any other client. Early 30s, office worker trying to get in shape, polite and respectful during their initial consultation. His goals were reasonable, and he was willing to work at different locations to accommodate her schedule. Their first few sessions went smoothly. Ryan was attentive, followed instructions well, and maintained appropriate professional boundaries. When they matched on Happn a week later, he joked about how the app had caught them crossing paths at the gym. It seemed innocent enough. Kate had matched with clients before. It was almost inevitable given how many people she interacted with daily. Usually, she'd just unmatch and explain professionally that she preferred to keep relationships strictly professional. But Ryan's profile mentioned recently moving from Seattle, and she was relatively new to Portland herself. After a few casual chats about adjusting to Portland life, they agreed to meet for coffee after his next training session. It would be a chance to step out of the trainer-client dynamic and see if there was any real connection. Kate made sure to schedule it at a busy cafe near the gym's main branch. The coffee meetup never happened. Ryan canceled last minute, apologizing profusely and rescheduling their next training session to a different branch. Kate noticed he'd started appearing at her other locations, always with seemingly valid reasons, booking sessions with other trainers when she was scheduled there. Small things began catching her attention. Equipment she'd carefully arranged for her sessions would be slightly moved when she arrived. Her personal locker at different branches showed signs of tampering, though nothing was ever missing. Client files she needed would be misplaced, only to reappear in odd locations. Other trainers started mentioning Ryan. He'd ask casual questions about Kate's schedule, claiming he was trying to book more sessions. He'd linger after his workouts, always positioning himself to watch her train other clients. When confronted, he had plausible explanations for everything. Kate began noticing him outside the gyms. He'd be at her local grocery store, claiming he'd just moved to the neighborhood. She'd spot his car in her apartment complex's visitor parking, and he'd say he was visiting a friend. Each explanation seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. The Happn app started showing their paths crossing, at odd hours and locations, places Kate was sure she hadn't seen him. When she checked the gym's security footage for those times, she'd catch glimpses of him following at a distance, careful to stay just out of her direct line of sight. Her personal training schedule, which was only accessible through the gym's internal system, began showing unexpected changes. Sessions would be rebooked to isolated branches during off-peak hours. When she reported it, IT found no evidence of unauthorized access. Working with the gym's security team, Kate started documenting every incident. They discovered Ryan had memberships at all 24 locations, signed up under slightly different variations of his name. He'd been using the multiple memberships to access different branches without raising suspicion. The security footage revealed more. He would arrive before her shifts, inspect her usual training areas, and sometimes interfere with equipment she was known to use. He had learned the blind spots in the security camera coverage and used them to observe her undetected. They found he had somehow obtained an employee keycard, giving him access to staff areas. The card's usage log showed entries at multiple locations late at night, often after Kate had finished her last session. He had been studying her training plans, client notes, and schedule printouts. Other female trainers came forward with similar experiences. Ryan had attempted to book sessions with several of them, always asking detailed questions about their schedules and routines. He seemed to be gathering information about staff movements and security protocols. The investigation into his membership applications raised red flags. His employment references were fake, his emergency contact numbers led nowhere, and his payment information was linked to prepaid cards. Everything about his identity had been carefully constructed to avoid detection. The most disturbing discovery came from the gym's database logs. Someone with high-level access had been monitoring the scheduling system, tracking specific trainers' movements across different locations. The intrusion was sophisticated enough to suggest professional IT experience. Kate's friend in cybercrimes helped uncover Ryan's true identity. Alexander Walsh, a former security system installer who had been fired for stalking employees at client locations. He had a history of using his technical knowledge to compromise building security and tracking systems. His method was always the same: sign up at fitness centers, gain access to secure areas using his knowledge of security systems, and gradually gather information about female staff members. He would then use dating apps to create seemingly chance encounters while building detailed profiles of his targets. The police search of his apartment revealed the scale of his operation. Multiple monitors displayed live feeds from hacked security cameras at different gym locations. Files contained detailed schedule analysis, patrol patterns of security staff, and maintenance logs showing when certain areas would be empty. He had created detailed maps of each gym location, marking camera blind spots, emergency exits, and isolated areas. His notes included staff routines, relationships between employees, and potential weaknesses in security protocols. Each detail had been meticulously documented and analyzed. The most chilling discovery was a room dedicated to surveillance equipment. He had professional-grade cameras, listening devices, and tools for duplicating key cards. Everything a stalker would need to track and monitor multiple targets across different locations. His computer revealed he had compromised the gym's scheduling software months before approaching Kate. He had been studying staff patterns, identifying potential targets, and testing the system's vulnerabilities. Kate wasn't his first target, but she was meant to be his most comprehensive operation. The police set up a sting operation using Kate's regular training schedule as bait. They knew Walsh would be monitoring the gym's systems, so they maintained her normal routine while positioning undercover officers throughout the facility. The trap was carefully planned. Kate would work her usual late shift at one of the smaller branches, apparently alone, except for a few regular clients who were actually undercover officers. Security cameras were supplemented with hidden ones that Walsh couldn't detect. Walsh took the bait, arriving at the gym during what he thought was Kate's vulnerable closing shift. He had disabled the main security cameras and used his duplicate keycard to access the staff areas. What he didn't know was that every movement was being recorded by the hidden systems. When confronted by police, Walsh revealed the true scope of his obsession. He had been perfecting his technique for years, using different gyms across multiple cities. Each time, he refined his approach, learning from previous failures and developing more sophisticated methods of surveillance. In his confession, he detailed how he used dating apps to create false coincidences, carefully engineering situations that would seem natural to his targets. The app's location features helped him track movements and create opportunities for accidental meetings. The investigation revealed connections to similar cases in other cities, each involving fitness centers and female staff members. Walsh had been teaching others his methods through online forums, creating a network of stalkers who shared techniques for compromising gym security systems. Walsh now faces multiple federal charges for stalking, cyberstalking, and illegal surveillance. The investigation has expanded to include gyms in several states, with more victims coming forward as the story spreads. The fitness industry has been forced to confront its vulnerability to this type of predatory behavior. Kate still works as a personal trainer, but everything has changed. The gym chain has overhauled its security systems, implemented new staff, safety protocols, and improved background checks for members. Trainers no longer work alone during opening or closing shifts. The dating apps are gone from her phone. As she wrote in her final email to me, the scariest part wasn't the technology he used, or even the stalking itself. It was realizing that our normal routines, the places we consider safe, can be turned into weapons against us. Every security measure we trusted became a tool in his hands. The fitness community has changed too. Trainers share information about suspicious behavior, maintain buddy systems during off-peak hours, and take extra precautions with client information. The sense of security that should come with a professional gym environment has been permanently altered. What haunts Kate most isn't the surveillance or the stalking. It's how easily Walsh exploited the normal operations of a busy gym. Her routines weren't careless. Her precautions weren't lacking. She was simply doing her job in what should have been a safe environment. The gym still operates all 24 locations, but something has changed. Security cameras are checked more frequently, keycards are more carefully monitored, and members watch out for each other with renewed vigilance. But in the early morning hours or late at night, when the gym is quiet, everyone remembers how easily safety can become vulnerability.